Here today. We have a couple of people with us, our state representative, Minority Leader Todd Pritchard, our former Mayor Jim Urban, our current Mayor Dean Andrews. I got 4 words for you: geologist, brewer, mayor, governor. You know, when you're a geologist, you actually believe in science. Isn't that a comforting thing? And of course, Ben Franklin said, beer is God's way of knowing he wants us to be happy. Thank you for doing that. As mayor of Denver and governor of Colorado, John has a record of accomplishment, of delivering pragmatic results that help people. That's what we really need. And what really attracted to him decades ago, he said, no one should offer themselves for public office until they've spent a couple of years running a high-end restaurant.
High volume.
High volume.
Not high-end.
High volume. High volume. Anyway, he's got the kind of skills and set that really make a great president. So let's give a warm welcome to John Hickenlooper.
So first I want to thank Jim for putting this together and you know, putting out whatever the catnip was that got you all here. I suspect it wasn't just me. And I appreciate, Todd, all the work you've done, and the mayors. You know, once you've been a mayor, you meet another mayor, and you are brothers, you are sisters, you are family. I came out west. I grew up on the East Coast, and came out as a geologist in 1981 when I moved up permanently to Colorado. Within 5 years, there was a recession, intermittent recession, and not only did I get laid off, but 15,000 other, 20,000 other geologists got laid off. So there were no jobs for a geologist. Everyone was letting, you know, people were adding geologists to the flow, not taking them out. And I can tell you that, and I was lucky, I didn't have any kids or any dependents. I was young. So when I lost my profession and had to kind of recreate myself, you know, I didn't have many of the challenges that so many people in the 90s and the 80s did. But I will tell you, after you've been out of work for 6 or 8 months, I'm sure there's a couple people in this room, or maybe several people in this room that have been there, you begin to see a different person in the mirror. And you begin to lose some of the confidence you always had. I was lucky, I had some good friends. This one crazy friend, Jerry Williams, I'd come back and I'd seen a brew pub on the West Coast, and he got really excited and decided he was going to open one. And he was a brilliant, smart person, but not much of a business person. And it turned out I was an entrepreneur. I didn't know it. I thought I'd be a geologist my whole life. But we went to the library, got a book on how to write a business plan, and we opened the first brew pub in the Rocky Mountains, right? The first brew pub anywhere in the Rocky Mountains in 1988 in a part of Denver, what they call now Lodo, lower downtown. But back then, it was just a forgotten corner of Denver. The rent was $1 per square foot per year. Oh my. Right? I mean, it was abandoned, and no one thought that we could ever succeed. And it took us 2 years to raise the money. My own mother wouldn't invest. Oh. Trying to get her just to give me $5 grand. We were just trying to get $5,000 units, begging and pleading. But when we opened, I went to the other restaurants. There were about a half dozen other restaurants. I said, if we work together, we can actually do something more significant. And within 6 months, we were buying pint glasses together. We took out an ad in the Denver Post and the Rocky Mountain News with a little map that showed where all our restaurants were. And pretty soon, all of a sudden, we all started doing better. The idea was, rather than just always being, you know, competitors and against each other, maybe if we worked together. Now, just for the record, we were not price setting. We were not monopolies. We were trying to collaborate to take a difficult situation and make ourselves more successful. And business started to take off. We opened 14 other brew pubs, almost all in the Midwest, almost all in historic buildings in downtowns. Each one had a different name. We tried to find local partners, trying to bring community back to our old to cities and smaller towns. We didn't want to Rapid City, South Dakota. It's still there, the firehouse. We won in Green Bay, Wisconsin, Titletown. It's so long since they really won a title that's slipping. I shouldn't say that. I get in trouble in Wisconsin. Anyway, our group has started doing well, and I was the one person in 2003 that was, telling the customers that they thought, my customers thought every elected official was a bum. That city councilman, that congressperson, they're all bums. And I kept saying, wait a second, this is America. They are us. And if we're unhappy, you guys should run and vote that person out of office. Somehow they twisted that on me. And I think, I never ran for a student council. I mean, I grew up in a very sad house. I was a skinny kid, and funny last name. I had these thick Coke bottle glasses. My dad died when I was a kid. When I was in high school, I was the last person any of my friends ever thought would run for office. Because until I got in that restaurant and had the exhilaration of putting a team together and building something that mattered, I didn't know I had any leadership skills at all. And somehow, when in 2003, a bunch of my friends and customers talked me into running for mayor of Denver. Denver's a strong mayor form of government. The mayor, city council needs 9 out of 13 votes to change one line item in the budget. It's a great system if you're the mayor. Right? And that experience, bring a team together, and I ran on the premise that Denver is about 20% of the whole metropolitan area. But just like with those other restaurant owners, if we all work together, we could create a rising tide that would help everyone. And I said, Denver will never be a great city without great suburbs. I'm going to do everything I can to lift up our suburbs. And the political consultants said I was crazy because the suburbs and Denver had been feuding for 100 years. They hated each other. But it turned out it wasn't the people that hated each other. It was the elected officials needed convenient enemies, and they were always at war with each other. And I won. I got an open seat, 4 lifetime talented. I mean, all 4 of them were good friends of mine to this day. Politicians. I got 65% of the vote.
Wow.
And there was a real appetite for that vision of people working together. And I went out to all the suburban mayors once I got elected, and we ended up getting all 34 mayors. So 2/3 of them Republicans or at least conservative independent, but all 34 mayors unanimously supported a sales tax increase to build what we call fast tracks. 122 miles of light rail track to really deal. We had so much congestion and traffic. It was the single most important thing we could do. And we got everyone to join in, and we built it. Now if you fly into Denver, you can take a train in from the airport into downtown, see this amazing station. By working together, we transformed the whole metro area. We really did transform the way people thought of it. So then when I ran for governor in 2010, and it's worth pointing out, when I won that election, I became the first Denver mayor in 120 years to get elected governor because that history of feuding was so intense. And I made the commitment that we would work together in the state and we would create an economic development plan. We were 40th in job creation. I said, well, we're going to turn that around, but we're going to do it in such a way that we don't leave the rural parts of the state behind. And I'm going to be the first governor that really reaches out and makes sure we do everything we can to support the rural parts of the state. And fast forward 8 years now, and we provide tax incentives for people to put their small businesses in rural areas. We will be the first state, I believe, by the end of 2020, we will have broadband in every single hospital, every school, every town in the state of Colorado. And I think for 2018, we're going to be one of the, if not the strongest performing rural state. If you look at just the rural counties, we'll have the strongest rural economy in the country. And to this day, I've got a bunch of those ranchers and farmers who were skeptical. They supported me because they thought as an entrepreneur, pretty much every farmer to a certain extent is an entrepreneur, right? Making all those decisions every day, every year. There was a real kinship there. And now a lot of these guys want to come out and drive me across western and northern Iowa and say, here's what Hickenlooper did for rural Colorado, here's what he can do for Iowa, here's what he can do for America. And I look at, I'm running, and honest to gosh, of all the people running for president right now, I think I'm the one person that can honestly say, I never ran for student council, I never ran for class president, I never had that ambition, never thought about it in my life until I ran for mayor. And I really didn't think about running for governor until about 1.5 or 2 years before Governor Ritter began to imply that he might not run for a second term. But I hadn't really thought about it. I was just focused on being a good mayor, and then when I was governor, focused on being a good governor. But for the last year and a half, I've been looking at what this country has come to. And I think, well, let me put it this way. I'm running for president because I think we're facing a monumental crisis, a crisis of division. And I don't think we've been this divided since probably the Civil War. And it predates Trump. I woke up in the middle of the night a few weeks ago and I told my wife, she was luckily awake. And I probably would have woken her up and that would have been a big mistake. But I told my wife, defeating Donald Trump is absolutely essential, but it is not sufficient. And I feel that division right now is keeping us from dealing with some of the big issues. Healthcare, right? Let's get to universal coverage, but the spiral in costs, regardless of how we find coverage, has been out of control. Climate change. I mean, I'm a scientist. I tell you, we are probably, based on so many smart people, we're beginning to approach a tipping point where we will go beyond the point where we can get back certain things we'll lose. One would be coral reefs. They're telling me that, literally in 6 to 10 years, we could end up in a situation where we're going to lose 90% of the coral reefs in the world. I mean, I look at God's creations and that we all have a certain responsibility for that. It creates a concern, and we don't have a sense of urgency. Not only that, President Trump opposes any efforts to diminish the climate pollutants. In Colorado, we were able to get the environmental community to sit down with the oil and gas industry and create the first methane regulations in the United States. So that it's equivalent, the oil and gas paid for it in the end. And let me tell you, these guys hate each other, right? I mean, the oil and gas industry, the environmental community, they are at loggerheads with each other. But once you get them to sit down and listen to each other and talk to each other, we got to that point where the oil and gas industry agreed to spend $60 million a year to make sure that none of this methane was flared or escaped. They checked every pump and every pipe, every tank. It's the equivalent of taking 320,000 automobiles a year off the roads. And I think that approach to climate change, really dealing with healthcare directly, looking at jobs and the economy, right? We were 40th in job creation in Colorado. Now, for the last 2 years, we're the #1 economy in America. Wow. Well, but that's from changing the culture to say, all right, we're gonna be pro-jobs and pro-small business, but we're gonna hold ourselves to the highest ethical standards, the highest environmental standards, and make sure that we're doing it in the right way. And I think that's to a large extent what Colorado's done. Anyway, that's all a long way of saying I'm running for president because I think, A, I can beat Donald Trump. I know that I can beat Donald Trump. But more importantly, I think I can bring us together on the other side and get people to begin working together again to create real progress and real goals. Now, people say it's impossible. And the story I always told when I was running for mayor, and they told me it was impossible I could win, and I thought back at, our team never gave up. And even when I was like, the first 6 weeks, I was always at 4% or 5% in the polls. And I used to carry, I found a newspaper story and I cut it out. I had this clipping I carried everywhere to try and fire up my young volunteers. And it was a professor of public speaking at University of Wyoming, just to the north. And she was telling her class the importance of using opposites to create emotional impact. We talk about the worst of times, talk about the best of times, talk about the agony, talk about the ecstasy. The words gain power by being together. And then she'd say, what is the opposite of despair? And the kid would raise their hand and go, joy? She goes, exactly. You want people to feel despair, use joy in the same sense. They get power from being together. Then she said, what's the opposite of woe? And the kid way in the back goes, giddy up! but the beauty of that is that in almost every case, the opposite of woe is to work harder, right? The opposite of woe is to work harder and push ourselves. And I think when we look at how we're going to really deal with healthcare to make sure that we do get to universal coverage, but it's at a cost that people can afford, how are we going to address climate change in real time? Right? We don't have the luxury of doing a 5-year or 10-year plan. We got to start making decisions now. We look at the economy and jobs. How are we going to train, make sure kids of all ages have the skills they're going to need for this emerging types of, jobs are going to change so dramatically in the next 5 or 10 years. We got to be working on that right now. And I feel that, in a funny way, people say, well, it's impossible to get people to work together to accomplish those challenges. Nonsense, right? The question is just whether we're willing to work together and whether we're willing to giddy up. Anyway, thank you all. Now, questions, always the best part, especially in the morning. Yes?
I have one. My name is Bob Carrier from Charles City, Iowa, and this question I'm about to ask you, correct me if I'm wrong about any of it.
Okay.
Since 2014, in the state of Colorado, you've taken in $6 billion, $266 million in taxes. It was the signing of the bill for the recreational use of marijuana. How much of the money, the taxes, have been used for the school system?
So the question was, how much money was taken in from the tax revenues from the expanded, what we call adult use recreational marijuana, which for the record I opposed. But we, our voters passed it 55-45, and I believe that states are the laboratories of democracy. When our voters wanted to do it, we did it. It wasn't perfect. No one had ever done it before. It's no fun to be in conflict with federal law, let me guarantee you. But I think it's worked. I mean, if you look at the old system, where we sent millions of kids to prison, most of them from low-income backgrounds, and not only that, we made them felons, so we made difficult lives infinitely harder. The old system was a disaster. And the first 3 years I told other governors, don't jump at it, certainly don't do it for the revenue. But for the last year or two, I've been saying, well, if your voters do it, you probably should implement it. And for the last 6 months, I've been saying, I don't think we'll ever go back. And I'm not sure the federal government should legalize it for, force Alabama or Maine or, any state that they should have to legalize. It's a difficult decision for any state. But I think the federal government should take it off what they call Schedule I narcotic, which means you can't even do research. And should make it so that we can get banking, and people, in states where they want to legalize it, they should be able to have a system that doesn't invite corruption. Now, your question was how much of the money, the tax revenue.
Yes, and I also wanted to know if your opinion has changed since 2014, and then also how people look at it. 465,000 people a year die from cigarette smoking. Lord knows how many from drunk driving and everything. If people think that you're going to keep people from getting the stuff in every single state, they're kidding themselves, just like alcohol.
You're right.
And that's another thing I just want to know if your opinions have changed since you signed the bill.
So we had largely decriminalized just marijuana possession. Certainly when I was mayor of Denver, we did decriminalize it. But it's a whole different thing to legalize it. When you even Amsterdam had never legalized marijuana and created a regulatory framework, which is it's a monumental task. So your question was how much tax revenues. The revenues we get right now, this past year was about $250 million. Sounds like a big number, except more than a third of that we spend on inspectors and a regulatory framework, just like we have for alcohol, where we go and make sure that kids aren't getting it. Every scientist, every brain scientist I've talked to believes that there's a probability that if you're a teenager and you smoke this high THC marijuana, it has a very, very high probability of taking a sliver of your long-term memory. And kids think they're invulnerable. They don't believe that. I've got a 16-year-old son. I've told him this 1,000 times, and a few months ago, he was describing his friend smoking pot. And I said, how can you, don't do that. But kids are being what they make. I will tell you, we do a survey every 2 years of more than 20,000 people, and we have not seen any increase in teenage consumption. So what you're saying is right. The kids were already getting it when it was illegal, and that's true probably all across this country. Now at least we have a regulatory framework, and we do get some revenues. So of that revenues, $50 million a year goes right off the top to school buildings. I think we're now, I'd have to go back and check, I think we added another $30 or $40 million that goes directly to schools, and there's a regulatory framework. What we've spent almost all the rest of the money for is providing services to deal with the unintended consequences of drug addiction and drug use. And I'm not saying marijuana is the cause of someone getting into heroin or opioids. I'm just saying that that's a hard thing to raise money for if you're a government, and it's something, talk about ripping families apart. I'm sure there's everybody in this room knows someone who's got a family member who got caught up in drug addiction, and it is the single, emotionally most draining, or one of the most draining things. My mom was widowed twice before she was 40 years old. I understand something about about sorrow and how difficult life can be sometimes. But I also know, I mean, she told us when we were kids, you know, no one else is gonna make you happy, and you gotta figure out how to deal with that. But when you have a drug addiction in your family, boy, it's hard to get past that. And I think what we've been able to do is set up a variety of programs that we didn't have before that we think we're seeing real results. We've got a decline in opioid addiction right now. I think we're finally beginning our see on the other light, but it hasn't been $5 or $6 billion. I think the total amount total tax revenue is more like 600 million. Still a big number, but then you take away the regulatory stuff and put in the amount that goes to the schools. We also have we're able to use some of that money for advertising programs to make sure kids know that we adults, just because we legalize it, don't think this is a good idea for young people to consume. And I think your argument that compared to alcohol, there's a friend of mine who's a researcher at UCLA. I got to know these guys. Told me that last year, I think it was roughly 40,000 people died from medical consequences of alcohol consumption. And I was in the beer business, right? I get this. Although I always told I had a cousin who gave me a hard time, and I'd say, well, with craft beer, you pay half again more, so you'll drink less. Just appreciate it more. But 40,000 people died of the medical consequences of alcohol. No one died from the medical consequences of marijuana. And I think I think at some point we're going to equilibrate and look at marijuana as something that's still risky. Let me be very clear, especially with young people who have an inclination towards bipolar. If you take this high THC, there are lots of examples, they're rare, but there are lots of examples of kids that become schizophrenic. I mean, they get into an intense bipolar experience, and it's very hard to get them sorted out and get back into their lives. It's just, again, as someone who's got two different friends, families, where they've experienced this, it is intensely challenging. So there's no perfect part of it, but I do think the country's going to go towards legalizing, and I think ultimately we'll be better for that.
I just had one last thing, and I'll be quiet. This is that I'm not advocating it at all, but a straight mind is the best mind.
Absolutely. There's no question about it. Although his comment was that a straight mind is the best mind, and that's my son asked me. He said, you know, you smoked pot when you were in college. Why shouldn't I? And why don't you still do it now? It's legal. I said, well, you know, as I got older, I found it easier and easier to put my foot in my mouth without any assistance. But you are right. I mean, but in some way, for many people who are stressed out, having a glass of wine or a beer or getting a high is something that allows them to deal with the pressure of life better. I'm not sure why that is. I will tell you, running for president now, which is a pretty intense thing, right? We went to bed, what time did we get in last night? Midnight, and we'll go across Iowa today. I don't drink. I mean, I rarely will have a beer anymore just because I don't have the luxury of kind of waking up and not being sharp. So I bet I've had three beers in the last 10 days. I did have a stout yesterday at a craft brewery that was pretty delicious. Other questions? Yeah.
I'm Chris Smith. I live in Arvada, Colorado. I'm on my way back home from northern Wisconsin. And I love this weather. This is the first time I've been above freezing since February. But I wanted to stop by because this man made Colorado better. He made Denver better, and life is better because of him.
Oh, wow.
And what he says is accurate, correct, and true. And I'm an independent, I'm going to vote for it.
Yeah.
So our nation has an exploding deficit budget, right? Our budget's going crazy. If you were elected president, how would you go about fixing it?
So I think, and that's a big, the question was, how do we deal with this exploding deficit, which, you know, this tax cut that basically provided $1.4 trillion additional burden to the national debt, and the benefits were very, concentrated really to a very small number of people. And I think even the corporate world, a friend of mine who was an accountant pointed out that 30% of our stock market. The stock market basically, our company's got almost half the benefit of that debt, of that tax cut. 30% is owned by foreign governments and foreign individuals. So if it was 1.5 trillion, and half of that went to the stock market, let's say that's 750 billion, 750 billion. And then of that, 30% is owned by foreigners. That means we gave about $250 billion to foreign individuals and companies in that tax cut. And I don't think anybody really thought about it or intended that. And I think the answer to how you're going to deal with the deficit is A, use facts, right? To actually get out the calculator and say, all right, long term, this is not, and some people are out there saying now, deficits don't matter, right? That's crazy. We all know that sometimes we've all been in places where we've taken on more loan than we wanted. Look at the level of student debt we have right now in this country. It's now more than all the mortgages put together. Somebody told me that a couple days ago. Debt is not unlimited. So I think we're going to certainly take some level of new taxes of revenue and probably go back up for the wealthy, take them back up to, what was it, 39%. I think the president's tax cut got them down to 37%. I mean, I know some very wealthy people. I don't know any one of them that really would have fought for that tax cut or really cared about it. Now, they're not going to give it away, right? But really wealthy people, that 2% didn't make a difference. And I've talked to a bunch of them. I've never had anybody try to talk me out of it. The corporate tax cut, probably that should be rebalanced. I mean, we went from being one of the highest, which is not a good idea, but we went to the lowest. And even when you look at all the other taxes blended in, we're probably a little low now. But that's only part of it. Part of it is trying to figure out how do you make government more efficient, right? I'm a great believer. I don't think government has to be bigger. I think government has to be better. And so what we did when I was mayor, we had a couple of recessions that pushed this, but we never had layoffs. There's so many baby boomers retiring right now, you don't have to lay anybody off, but you can find ways to use technology or software. When people leave government, you don't have to replace everyone. So in the 8 years I was mayor, we ended up with 7% less employees when I left than when we got there, and yet we were providing almost double the services, I think it's fair to say. Really going above and beyond in many ways. So that's part of the savings that is there, and we'll have to work at. I mean, one of the great problems that Trump has done to this country is he has disrespected workers at every level. And anybody who's ever been in business or worked for someone understands that morale matters so much. It's so powerful. And when you destroy the morale of a workforce, your costs go up, your efficiency goes down, all kinds of bad things happen. So I think we have to really renew a partnership with the employees of the country, or of the federal government of the country, but also the employees of the country. I'm going to use that. That's a different way of thinking about it. But both, right? We're not going to do this by ourselves. We're not going to, no elected official at any level is really going to solve the issues around the budget without the support of all the workers and recognizing that we're all in this together, right? Right now, I can give you 5 huge important places where we need more resources. And we can't just borrow the money to do that. We're going to have to come together and say, all right, here's the solutions to healthcare. And I think they're there. They aren't going to cost that much more money, right? Maybe a little bit of money up front, but basically we can get to the next step. Same thing with climate change. We've got a thing in Colorado. We're going to close 2 coal plants, and we worked on this for the last 2 years, but this is now happening. And we went out and did bids to get the cheapest possible solar and wind that you could get. And again, we held on to public safety standards. I mean, we made sure that the permitting would not disadvantage any neighborhood or community in Pueblo where they're going to build the new solar plant or the new wind farms. But we wanted to make it as inexpensive as possible. And what we ended up with, and this is the first time in the country this is true, we're closing the 2 coal plants, and we're going to have wind, solar, and batteries take the place. So not natural gas, batteries take the place. And this will be the first time where wind, solar, and batteries will actually be less expensive than the coal was. So what's going to happen is people's monthly electric bill is going to go down. So, and you know, the Republicans still protested this because they are protecting the coal industry. I'm not sure. I mean, and also just for the record, we'll have no loss in jobs. We'll replace every job. They came out. Some of the Republicans came out and protested, and so I stopped and I said, all right, I believe in working together, and I understand. I'm willing to compromise. Where do you want me to compromise? Do you want me to compromise on the cleaner air or the lower cost to consumers? And that put them in a pretty tough spot. Anyway, I think I mean, everything's going to have a price tag, and we are going to have to, every single issue we face, we're going to have to figure out how to do more with less. Yeah, and I'm going to come back to you. I know you had a question.
I think you partially addressed some of these. What are your top 3 priorities when you come into office, and how precisely what would you be doing to achieve those priorities?
So the 3 highest priorities, and in detail, what would I do?
Well,
Yikes! How much time you all got?
just try and shorten it
Sure,
down.
yeah. That's what my wife tells me. My wife says, you know, John, you've got the best stories. Just tighten them up a little bit, will you? I apologize. So obviously, I think healthcare is just a huge issue. It's hard. I'm not ranking. I don't like. Everybody has their. I mean, many of the people I trust and respect the most feel climate change is the most important thing because it's our planet, and I get that. I also think healthcare is our health, right? So I think that's critically important, and I think that the potential disruption in workplaces all over this country from robots, automation, artificial intelligence, no one's talking about it. I mean, you see little stories about it, but no one's really addressing it. So let me take those 3. All right. In terms of, we'll do climate change just because my cousin cares so passionately about it. He always wants me to make sure I put climate change first. But I think we have to address all 3 of these at once. This notion that we can only do one thing at a time in the federal government, we do not have that luxury right now. I mean, we've gone too far down the road. So climate change, what we did with methane, absolutely first. It should be done in the United States. We should roll it out over the entire United States. But more importantly, everything we do in this country has to go and we've got to have the relationships with the rest of the world. Because if we do it here and China doesn't do it, who cares? We're done. And we need to have those. And I'm the first person that said China, you know, they were stealing our intellectual property, right? Forcing companies that traded in China, they're forcing. I mean, we can't let that happen. But there's a negotiation, a way to negotiate. So that's, and I go down the list of weatherization, winterizing buildings and homes. We created a network for rapid recharging stations for electric vehicles. That would be the 3rd step in this. That we've got to, and this is going to happen fast, right? 4 years, 5 years from now, you're not going to believe how many electric vehicles are going to be on the road. It's going to happen. So that's that one. Am I about to get cut off? Do I have 2 minutes?
You get to take one more question.
Okay, well, let me finish this real quick.
Okay.
And then I'll take her question, and then I'll be off. And I'll be shorter, I promise. I promise. The president, I will never speak this long.
There's nothing wrong with being tall. Come on.